Group of politicians in Washington, D.C. proposed nationwide rent control, but landlords are saying that it would create slumlords. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's going over these landlords up in the state of Wyoming who are arguing against nationwide rent control. Obviously, right now, housing prices have gone through the roof, and you know what? A lot of these left-leaning progressive politicians are saying, hey, we need rent control. You know what? We need to put something in place that will keep prices from going up. You know what? They're not even looking at the facts. They're not looking at economics. They're not looking at anything. They're just putting out a feel-good measure to get themselves votes. That's my personal opinion, okay? And I think that some of the really stupid ones of these politicians, they actually believe that this is going to work. It never works, and I just don't understand why they seem to believe that, you know, it's going to suddenly start working, you know, if they put it in place. Oh, it'll be different than the last time. That's what they always think. You know, they think, oh, we're going to put it in place and it's going to be different than last time. Well, guess what? It's not going to be different. It's going to be the same old garbage, and it's going to, you know, basically disincentivize landlords from wanting to develop or even offer rental properties. Instead, what people are going to do is they're going to get out of the rental business. There's going to be less properties available. There's going to be less construction, and it's going to be a lot harder for people to find affordable housing. And they want to put this in place nationwide. Could you imagine that? I mean, it would be awful, okay? It would bankrupt a lot of us. I'd get out of the business. That's the truth. If there was nationwide rent control, I would just get completely out of the business. I own a whole bunch of single-family homes. I'd sell them off to owner-occupants, and I'd sell all of my multifamily to some other landlord, probably a large corporation who wanted to stay in the business because they knew that they had, you know, even with thinner profit margins, they could still make a profit. But it's not worth the hassle for me, a small landlord, okay? And it wouldn't be worth the hassle for the majority of small landlords. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button. Maybe leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. If there was a nationwide rent control in place right now, would you stay in business as a landlord, or would you get out of the landlord business? That's my question, okay? Do you think it's worth dealing with? Now, keep in mind, I know right now that there are small landlords who do operate in places with rent control laws in place. But you know what? A lot of them are saying, hey, you know, we are getting hit hard. We're getting hit hard when our costs go up and we can't raise the rents to make up for those increasing costs. And you know what? I feel for them. I feel for them because they are fighting against the system, and in my opinion, it just isn't worth it, okay? But anyway, let's get into this article and see what it says. This article is coming from Cowboy State Daily, and it says, Wyoming landlords say national rent control idea is awful, would create more slumlords. Yeah, and when they say it's going to create more slumlords, it has to do with the fact that in order to cut costs, landlords are going to do a lot less maintenance, and they're going to spend a lot less money on capital expenditures, right? And that's going to cause properties to deteriorate. But anyway, let's get into this article, and you know, they'll probably clarify a little bit better than I can. A few dozen progressive lawmakers in Congress want President Joe Biden to enact rent control measures across the nation. Supporters argue inflation and the lingering economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic are making it hard for many people to afford rent. But opponents say that, as is the case with other federal interventions in the market, the unintended consequences of national rent control are ignored in the face of good intentions. Rental professionals in Wyoming say such regulations would result in fewer apartments being built and a reluctance to renovate and improve existing ones. Yeah, and you know, they brought up something else there, right? And they said, just like these other federal interventions that, you know, where they had these good intentions. And specifically, we could talk about the eviction moratoriums, right? And not only the eviction moratoriums, but the stimulus checks. If you look at, you know, what the intention behind those, you know, I think it was good intentions. But they had lots and lots of unintended consequences. When you give people, you know, these huge stimulus checks and, you know, expanded unemployment benefits, then you discourage people from wanting to work. And that basically destroyed the workforce, you know, made it impossible for businesses to find workers, okay? And not only that, but it drove up inflation. Wow, could you imagine that? And then speaking of the eviction moratorium, they were like, oh, well, we're going to keep people in their homes, right? Not realizing that, hey, we're bankrupting landlords, okay? Just like when they said, hey, we're going to have these stay-at-home orders, well, that destroyed small businesses. See, the unintended consequences of all of these federal interventions, it's not known right now, but it can be guessed that they're not going to be good. It's going to be bad. And a rent control law across the entire nation would be very, very bad. U.S. Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat from Massachusetts, and Representative Jamal Bowman, Democrat from New York, authored a letter signed by nearly 50 members of Congress, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat from New York, asking the Biden administration to pursue all possible strategies to end corporate price gouging in the real estate sector. The letter claims that high rents are unrelated to supply and demand, but rather corporate landlords and real estate companies increasing the rent for their own profit. It is clear that these heightened costs and acts of corporate profiteering are exacerbating an already existing crisis of housing unaffordability and instability, the letter states. Yeah, that's idiotic, okay? Now, as has been mentioned many, many times before, okay, these large mega corporations only own a very small percentage of the single family housing that's out there right now. I believe it's less than 5%. So if they're talking about anybody who is gouging prices, then they're talking about small landlords who are gouging prices. So yeah, it's hard to believe that they actually believe that, oh, well, what, these corporations, they work outside of the market. They're able to charge rents higher than what people can afford. No, they're not, okay? If people can't afford the rents, they're not going to rent the places. And you know what? These corporations, just like most small landlords, they operate on the free market, which means that if there are a lot of people out there who can't afford these higher rents, guess what? They're not going to pay them. And they're going to look for places that they can afford. So yeah, this is a whole bunch of garbage that's being put on right now by these politicians. Among the actions the supporters want is for the administration to establish renter protections for people living in properties financed with government-backed mortgages and to direct the Federal Trade Commission to issue new regulations defining excessive rent increases and take actions against whatever the FTC determines is price gouging. The letter doesn't define what excessive rent increases would be or how that would be determined. See, and that's the problem right there. What is an excessive rent increase, right? They can just make it up out of the top of their heads, right? They're like, well, $1 is an excessive rent increase. And believe me, they will. And if you look at places where other rent control laws are in place, I mean, I did a story about a place that said that, they wanted to strip away the current rents by like 15%. In one place, they were forcing landlords to cut rents. Can you imagine that? Okay, forcing landlords to take their current rent. If your rent is like $1,000 a month, and then them saying, well, your rents are too high, you have to cut your rent by 15% right now. Not taking into consideration our costs, our expenses, or anything. They just want to cut your profit because they know what price gouging is, right? They know that we're gouging prices. They haven't looked at my finances at all. They never talked to my accountant. They didn't look at my taxes. They didn't look at my expenses. They don't have a clue if you are gouging prices. They don't know. Okay, they are making this crap off the top of their head, and then they are saying, oh, well, blanket across the board, no landlord needs to raise rent above this percentage. Well, that's stupid, okay? And I'll say it again, that is stupid. But anyway, let's get down a little bit because the landlords in this article, they made some good comments, right? And I actually quite enjoy when I read, the comments that are put in the articles when they actually spend the time to talk to the landlords. That is one thing that I've noticed a lot. A lot of the times, they'll spend all day trying to write about some hard luck story for some tenant, but they will not talk to a landlord. So anyway, Slumlords. It also disincentivizes property improvements, as landlords wouldn't be able to profit from the upgrades, she said. In California or New York, where they've had rent control areas, a lot of the times, those landlords will just become slumlords, Volk said. Volk's brother, Jay Fred, who is also a broker associate at Number One Properties, said that property values would stagnate if national rent control laws were enacted. Your ability to get a loan is predicated upon the income that you got coming in, Jay Fred Volk said. Meanwhile, as the federal government would be limiting rental income, J. Fred Volk said property taxes, insurance costs, and material costs are still going up. And he brings up a great point, a point that I have mentioned before, right? The ability to get a loan has to do with if your rental income is, what they call it debt service cover, DCSR, right? Debt coverage service ratio. I'm sorry if I'm getting the acronym a little bit mixed up, right? But basically, the banks say, well, if you don't make a certain amount of income, then we're not going to give you the loan, okay? And banks, if you lose a certain amount of your income, like for example, if your expenses increase a certain amount and you're not able to raise the rents in order to make up for that, well, banks can call your loan due, okay? And you won't be able to get another loan on that property. Okay, so if they don't understand the basic financing that is behind multifamily real estate and behind what a lot of people, commercial real estate, then they can't be setting what the rent limits are. They can't. Okay. In fact, they shouldn't be setting rent limits at all. That's my personal opinion. So anyway, this is a really good article. I'm going to put a link to it in the description so that you can read the whole thing, because you know what? We need to fight against any sort of like nationwide rent control. It's a good thing that there's a more conservative House of Representatives right now, because I'm 100% certain that they would be pushing for this thing if that wasn't the case.